Welcome everybody. Thanks for meeting me on a Friday before I'm sure most of you are ready to visit family and friends and take a week off. So I appreciate everyone taking the time today to meet. Ray Kane is here. He's the outgoing chair, but Ray may have to sign off early from this meeting. So thankfully, Richie White has answered the call and been able to step up to help chair this meeting. So up on the screen here, we have the most up-to-date agenda, and I'll turn it over to Richie just to welcome us all and get us started.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Richie White, Governor's appointee for New Hampshire. Welcome to the Northern Shrimp Section meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda as presented? Any hands, Tony?
Sorry, I was muted, Richie. Sorry, I see no hands raised.
Okay, thank you. So the agenda is approved by consent. Next item is a report from Maggie Hunter, review of 2021 stock assessment update. All yours, Maggie.
All right, Maggie, we'll share the, yep, there you go.
Okay, are you seeing, hang on a minute. Sorry, folks. Dustin, are you seeing the first slide?
Yep, first slide in full screen is what it looks like.
Okay. Are you seeing my something from Word?
A small pop-up.
Okay.
If you click, I think, on the full screen slide, it should clear it all.
Okay, I just closed it. So, good morning, everyone. This is Maggie Hunter from the Maine Department of Marine Resources. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the other members of the technical committee, Robert Atwood from New Hampshire Fish and Game, Alicia Miller from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, Steve Wilcox from the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, with tremendous help from Katie Drew, ASMFC staff, and Dustin Colson-Leaning, whom you've already met. Thank you all very much. Let's see. Today I'm just going to talk very briefly about northern shrimp biology and then give a summary of some of the new data that we have since we made our last report back in 2019, and then give you the 2021 stock assessment update results. So northern shrimp biology, let's start with their distribution in the North Atlantic. You can see here in the Gulf of Maine, which is circled down in the lower left there, that we're in the southernmost part of the northern shrimps range. And it's considered a genetically discrete stock. On this slide, it looks like it's all connected with Nova Scotia and the Gulf of St. Lawrence and so on, but it is not really. It's really a very closed system, and it is a genetically discrete stock. In the Gulf of Maine, it tends to favor the western part of the Gulf. It likes relatively deep water, soft bottom, cold temperatures, those deep basins. And it also moves around quite a bit. In the summer, you tend to find it more offshore, but in the winter, the egg-bearing females move in to shore to hatch their eggs, and then that happens over the course of the winter, and then in the spring, after egg hatch, they gradually make their way back offshore again. The hatchlings that hatch out late in the winter will stay inshore for a year or more and then make their way back offshore as well. They have a very interesting life history. They mature first as males, and then they function as males for a year or two, and then they transition to become females at about age 3. They function as females. They usually extrude eggs late in the summer, early fall, and they may live to do that another year. So their lifespan's only about five years, maybe 6, if they make it that long. So the picture on the right shows you at the top what is probably a 5-year-old female, and then the next one down is probably a 4-year-old female, and the one in the middle here might be a 3-year-old female. Sometimes they do mature early, or it may be a transitional. I think the 4th one down is a transitional shrimp that's in the process. It's probably in its 3rd year in the winter, transitioning from male to female. And then this one is a small male, or actually it's fairly large for a male. And then these two that are side by side here near the bottom are not northern shrimp. They are pandalid shrimp. They're closely related, and they're very similar in shape, but they're generally very much smaller than the northern shrimp. And the one on the right is a Dichelopandalus leptocerus, and the one on the left is Pandalus montagui. And they both have stripes, which distinguishes them from the borealis, which they're similarly colored, but they're just kind of blotchy. And then the one on the bottom is a crangon, a sand shrimp. And so these are some of the common species and stages that we see in shrimp samples. So next I want to talk about some new data that we have since our report from 2019. And the only sort of winter projects we have had since then was in 2020, Maine conducted a very small project to test acoustic surveying, and we also coupled that with some trapping. So we were lucky to have right near our lab in Booth Bay a boat that had participated in acoustic monitoring of herring, and then later on shrimp back in 2016 and 17 with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and he still had his acoustic equipment on board. So what that gives you is like an echogram here that shows the bottom, which is this wiggly green and red line here, and the blue speckles above it are probably shrimp. So, and that was tested out and shown in work that GMRI did back in 2016, 17. So we also, so we contracted with this, with this boat to make a few trips right near the Booth Bay Lab, very limited area. I'll show you that in a minute. And we also contracted with some shrimp trappers to try trapping shrimp where the acoustic boat was surveying and see, first of all, whether what he was seeing really was shrimp and whether there was a correlation between what the trappers were catching and what the acoustic boat was seeing. We were thinking about this as possibly being a tool that you could use if you had an active fishery and you wanted to do some kind of a mid-season check during the winter to see how, see if the fishing was impacting the stock, and to look at the stock, that this might be a, quick and dirty way to really get out there and see what was going on. So I'll show you the results. This is the area that was surveyed, and it's, depending on how familiar you are with the Maine coast, it's a span of this from one side of the other to the other. Here's about 15 miles. So from these blue lines are the tracks that the acoustic boat made. And from here to here, across the span of his tracks is about 12 miles. This is the Sheepscot River here. The Booth Bay Harbor is here in the middle. And then in the east, way up in the right-hand corner, that's Pemaquid Point, and the Damariscotta River is in between there. Just to orient those of you who are familiar with that area, but it's not a very large area. And we divided it up into 3 sections for our analysis. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the first trip the boat made was in late January, and he saw a few shrimp. So he started out over here where his boat is, and he He made his way south and all the way to the east and then back. And he did this at night because shrimp are thought to be quite active in the water at night, but not during the day. So about a week later, he went again and he got a lot more shrimp this time. You can see the size of those bubbles indicates how much signal he's getting. And let's see, I lost my cursor. There it is. So it also happened to be full moon. And as this project went on, we found that the next week he went out, he didn't see nearly as many shrimp. And then the last week he saw fewer still. During a time in February where you would think you would still be seeing quite a few shrimp. This last trip that he made was a new moon, and it looked like there might be more of a correlation between the cycles of the moon than actually what the shrimp were doing. So that may confuse things and make this, difficult to do over time like this. So that's something we need to learn more about. But what the trappers was seeing, I'll show here in the red circles. The first week, several of the guys hadn't started yet, and they weren't getting a whole lot. They did better the next week. You can see, especially there's a boat that was going right up off in the mouth of the Sheepsgate here that was doing very well. And then by the next week, everybody was doing better. And the last week, they were still doing quite well, but it doesn't really agree at all with what the acoustic boat was seeing. So I'm afraid this project kind of posed more questions than it really answered, but it was really interesting. Some other things we learned was that egg hatch was quite early last year, and especially in the western section. And then it was not quite as early, but still earlier than usual in the eastern section. And then it was not quite as early as that in the midsection. So between just this small span of space, you had very differing results for when the timing of egg hatch was. So that was really interesting. And it kind of pointed up how when you do something like this, you really need to get a lot of data from a lot of different boats and a lot of different people. So this was 9 trappers, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. They were only allowed to fish up to 40 traps, and only one of them actually did fish 40 traps. And the rest of them did about, usually about 15 to 18 traps a piece, either doubles or triples. So, and another thing we noticed was that the western section boats did really quite well, and the eastern section boats did well, especially as things went on. They continued to fish into March for a while, and then the project wrapped up around the 3rd week of March. But and the middle section boats really didn't do very well at all. So again, just within, and these are all seasoned trappers who were experienced and had successful commercial seasons. We made sure when we picked people that they, these are folks who knew what they were doing. So it was very interesting to me that in just such a short area, you had such a variation in both what the samples told you about egg hatch and very different catch rates. So again, it kind of points up the importance of location, and also, just who the fishermen are and what they're able to do. Of course, it's not really fair to compare these results to what they would have been done if they were really commercial fishing, because they were, they were limited in how many traps they could put out. They were only being paid just to bring us a sample once a week, so there wasn't really an incentive to bring in a lot of shrimp. They weren't allowed to keep their catches. So the incentive really for them was just that they were being paid. But they're also, people have pride and they wanted to do well, and they were trying to do well, but there really wasn't an incentive to move their traps around a lot or do a lot of exploring, and they really weren't allowed a large number of traps to do that. Most of them were lobster fishermen who were just setting a few shrimp traps that they could fish on their way back and forth in their lobstering trips. So that may have constrained where they fished as well. So it's not really fair to compare this to, commercial catch rates and so on. But anyway, we learned a lot of interesting things. There's a report, and I'll be putting another report out today. The GMRI's report on the acoustic work is already out on our website, and I'll be putting DMR's report on the trapping results out on our website later today. But I just wanted to let you know that that was done. I don't know how much people knew about what we were doing, but it was really interesting, and I hope we get to do some more work like that. So next, I'll switch over now and talk about the assessment update. Just a little history. In 2018, we presented a full assessment with the model runs and so on. And then in 2019, we just gave you a data update. We didn't do any report in 2020. There really wasn't much new to report because most of the surveys weren't able to run that year. So for today, we're presenting an updated assessment with the full model runs and so on. The report is in a new format. You may not have seen this format yet, but it's something that ASMFC is working toward to get different committees to do more standardized reports. It's also shorter. We cut out all the stuff about how the fishery's managed, the history and description of the fishery, and we cut out all the biological stuff because that's all in the older reports. So, but we do have for this new report, we now have 2020 the catches from those trappers I just showed you. We have the 2021 Maine Hampshire Inshore Spring Survey. We have the summer survey, environmental data, and we have the fall survey from the Science Center data, but we only have that through 2019 because it didn't run in 2020, and we don't have the results yet from 2021. So we also, for other data that go into the assessment, we use landings data. We use port samples from the landings, and we also use these winter research project catches and samples from those in the assessment. We also use the fishery independent data from, we collect environmental data such as temperature and the predation data from the fall center surveys, environmental data from several sources. And we use the resource surveys I've already mentioned, the summer survey. The time series we're looking at is 1984 to 2021. For the fall survey, we're looking at 86 through 2008. And then in 2009, the vessel changed from the Albatross to the Bigelow. So that's a new time series for us because the gear and the boat were so different, and there weren't any comparison tows to make between the old boat and the new boat for shrimp. So we're considering those as two separate surveys in the assessment. And we also look at the Maine, New Hampshire survey, and that starts with the 2003 survey. We use model-based indices that are standardized for habitat. It's something new we started doing around 2018. And none of these surveys were conducted in 2020. The summer shrimp survey, one thing that's new with that since we've talked the last time was that they got new doors and winches in 2017. The big old heavy Portuguese doors were replaced with bison doors. We had some good advice from some fishermen on the design of the doors and what to get for the size of the net that we were using. The Portuguese doors were really kind of oversized, and how to I got advice on how to deploy those and rig those new doors. And I think you'll see in a minute, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we did manage to do between 2017 and 2019, 39 paired tows where we towed with the old doors and then switched out and towed with the new doors and back and forth. So we were able to compare the results. And thank you to Tim Miller and Peter Chase who analyzed the data for us. And their report is in the appendix to our assessment, and they concluded that there were no significant differences in catch efficiency between the two types of gear. So that's helpful to us. It means we don't have to make any calculations to try to configure the two surveys to get, we don't have to treat them as two surveys. because there didn't seem to be a difference between them. So makes our job a little easier. So part of the assessment is to run a model that was developed at the University of Maine several years ago. It's based on the lobster model that they made. It's been peer-reviewed in journals. It passed review by the Stock Assessment Review Committee in 2018. It was approved for management use by the section later in 2018. We also use a traffic light approach in presenting the data, in which green is going to represent favorable conditions for northern shrimp, red is going to be unfavorable, and yellow is just intermediate. And we define those categories by comparing with the 1984 through 2017 time series for whichever variable it is that we're looking at. And you'll see that in a minute. So the 2021 survey, it was a shortened survey because of COVID restrictions, but they did get 60 usable tows, which was really good for a shorter survey. I think those new doors are helping. We're not getting cross doors. We're not getting the mud tows that were wasting time, because we used to have to do them over again. We didn't keep any data when that happens, but we had to. It meant we weren't able to either get in as many tows or because we had to do them over. So that's been really helpful in getting more good data in the survey. So I'll just jump right in here with the survey results from the summer survey. Here's the traffic light approach for survey abundance from 1984 to 2021. And you can see in the recent 9 or 10 years, it's just been way below average. The 2021 point was a new time series low for shrimp abundance. And the graph down below is biomass, which tracks abundance pretty closely. So you see the results are very similar. Also a new time series low for northern shrimp biomass in the Gulf of Maine in 2021. Spawning stock biomass, which is just the female portion of the biomass, the 2021 value was the second lowest in the time series. And recruitment was also low. In 2021, there was a new low for recruits, which are the number of shrimp in the samples that we see that are those small males, probably about a year and a half old. So you can see there were a couple of years here where we got up into the yellow recently, but it was still below average. It's been below average for 9 or 10 years now. The fall survey gave much the same message, but we only have it through 2019. So we have the Albatross Survey. You can see here on the top, it ended in 2008, and then it picked up again as the Bigelow Survey. And you can see that the stock declined pretty drastically between 2010 and 2012. And then it's been running real low since then, only through 2019. Environmental conditions, we looked at several different sources. In the upper right here of your screen, I'm just going to talk about temperature first. So in the upper right, we have the bottom temperatures from the summer survey. And you can see that they've been in the red quite a lot. And these graphs, the red you see at the top rather than at the bottom, because high temperatures are unfavorable for northern shrimp. So you can see the value in 2021 was quite warm. Down in the lower left, we have the temperatures from the spring center salt trawl survey, and again 2021 was a very high number. And from the Booth Bay Harbor sea surface temperatures measured during February and March, which is when the shrimp or eggs are hatching, it's thought to be a fairly critical period for them. You see that's been way above average warmth too. So temperature data continues to show unfavorable conditions for northern shrimp. Only sort of glimmer of good news here is the predation numbers, and that's in the upper left-hand graph here. And the last 2 or 3 years of predation on northern shrimp has been down. In fact, it was slightly below average in 2019, which is the last point that we have available right now. So that's a little bit of good news for northern shrimp. So we ran the model, and I'll just give you a few results here. Obviously, fishing mortality has been extremely low since the moratorium went into effect here in the first year in 2014, and fishing mortality has been very low since then. A little bit of a blip here in 2017 when we had, I think, 32 metric tons were caught by the winter research fisheries, but as you would expect, fishing mortality has been very low. The spawning stock biomass has also been low for the last 8 or 9 years. A little bit of an uptick in 2021, but it's still very low. I think that may be responding to the drop in natural mortality and predation. But again, it's not a big change, and it's just running very low. We estimate the spawning stock to be about 887 metric tons in 2021. So I just want to get back to the surveys, just to mention one more survey that I haven't talked about much. I've already talked about this black line, which is the summer survey, and the fall survey, which is the sort of yellow line here that turns into the blue line here for the Bigelow survey. But there's another survey, the Maine, New Hampshire Spring Survey, the inshore spring survey we look at as well. And this is the green line here that went up a little bit. It stayed high a little bit longer than the other surveys did, and then it has dropped as well. And it's this little green plus sign here is the 2021 value, which I think was the second lowest in its time series. So, that's a survey that's conducted on an industry vessel captained by a shrimp fisherman. So they're seeing the same thing, unfortunately, that the other two surveys are seeing, which is very low abundance in the past 9 years. So in conclusion, the status of the stock continues to be poor. The spawning stock and total biomass are low and have been for 9 years. Recruitment has been what we call a recruitment failure in 6 out of those 9 years, and the other 3 years were well below average. So that's the technical committee's conclusion on the status of the stock. So I'm going to stop there and take any questions you might have. Anybody?
Thank you, Maggie. Excellent report, and obviously difficult data to receive. So I'll start by questions from the section to Maggie, and if Tony, if you could tell me the hands raised in the order that you see them, that would be helpful.
Will do, Richie. So far, I don't see any hands up. I have Megan Ware.
Okay, Megan.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more of a question about the surveys in general and specifically the summer survey, but I was just curious if there was any updates on future funding for that summer survey. I know that's been in question, and I didn't know if we had any recent information on where that stands.
Sorry, I don't. This is Maggie. Does anybody else on the call have any information about that?
I haven't heard anything, but Bob Beal has his hand up.
Thank you. Is that okay, Richie, if I chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Bob. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I talked to John Hare maybe a month ago, and he said that continued funding for the survey is going to be very difficult. There's the Science Center itself is struggling to cover all the surveys that they fund, and this is the one that's frankly on the chopping block. So it sounds like there's one more year of funding, most likely, the summer of 2022, and after that, it's very much up in the air what's going to happen. So, even 2022 is dependent on a new budget being approved by Congress. I think if we have a continuing resolution throughout the entire federal fiscal year, there's a high likelihood that the survey may not even happen in 2022, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I just want to say I give my compliments on the new stock assessment format. It was really easy to digest and read, so I appreciated that.
Richie, you have Sheree Patterson followed by Ray Kane.
Go ahead, Sheree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, if you can go back to where you had the predation slide that showed that the predation was lower. Yes, thank you. So are squid included in that predation pressure index?
No, they're not. Squid are tough because the predation pressure index is based on both the abundance of the predators and also what the likelihood that they will have shrimp in their stomachs from, historical stomach contents analysis that's been done. But there haven't been the stomach analyses on squid because they grind up their food and it's kind of unrecognizable in their stomachs. We did attempt to add a squid index, and that's one of the sensitivity runs in the report. I'm trying to remember whether it's in the appendix or in the main section of, it's in the main section of the report. So we did, we just assumed that they would have sort of an average likelihood of having shrimp in their stomachs, an average of what we were seeing in the other predators. We only had a index of abundance for them, I think from 2003 to 2017, that had been worked up by Ann Richards for us. So it increased the predation during that 2011 through 2013 period. It increased mortality, but it didn't really change too much. I might ask Katie Drew if she wants to hop in and discuss that a little bit more. I'm having trouble remembering just what the impact of adding the squid to the predation index was.
Yeah, sure, Maggie. I think you covered it for the most part. It was obviously there was difficulty in kind of combining them with the more standardized data that we use in the base case predation index. And then while it did increase predation during that period where we think there was a lot of inshore overlap with squid and shrimp in the Gulf of Maine related to that really sharp decline we saw after that really high peak in shrimp abundance, it didn't overall, I think it made the SSB slightly lower in the more recent times, but did not have a significant effect on either the performance of the model or the overall scale or trend of the model. But for sure, that's something we might want to look a little at more closely if we're able to get data that makes the squid data more comparable to the finfish data that we're using for the base case predation index.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That answers that.
Ray, you're up next, and I'd also like to say if your time schedule allows and you would like to resume the chair, I'd be more than happy to turn over the reins. Go ahead, Ray. We can't hear you.
Ray, you're just self-muted on your end. There you go.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the presenter once again. And at our last meeting, Richie, I believe you were co-chair and I turned out. So I don't know if it's been announced, but I believe you are the new chairman. That being said, I have a question to Bob Beal. A number of years ago, we had revenues, or what we called up funding at ASMFC. And I'm hearing a concern about the lack of trawl surveys in the future. Is there any of those revenues still available, Bob, in the up funding?
Yeah, Bob.
Yep. The short answer is no. There was that plus up. I think it was in 2018 of a few $100,000, and all that funding has been spent on other projects. So you know, we can look around for money, but it's as of right now, we don't have any extra funds that we can set aside for the shrimp survey.
Thank you, Bob. I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Any additional hands?
We have Steve Train.
Steve, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Tony. Maggie, thanks again for a great presentation as normal. I have a question about the predator effects, temperature effects, and natural mortality versus fishing pressure. Have there been any of those studies that you've done applied to where the population was during years of fishing seasons versus opposed? You know, what was the offset? What was the difference? How much did fishing pressure really affect the population versus the natural predation and the temperature environmental conditions?
That's a good question. Katie, can you help me out again?
Sure. So I would say we include the predation index for the entire time series in the model. So the model is getting information on what's happening with natural mortality as well as fishing pressure for the entire time series. And then when it comes to the environmental side, basically the important linkage there seems to be that warmer waters lead to poorer recruitment. And so you can see, and so while the model doesn't necessarily know what's happening with that temperature, it can see what's happening with the recruitment. And so what you see with the model is you do see that shift from fishing pressure having an effect along with kind of a lower natural mortality working sort of, I would say, together, as well as working with those cooler temperatures to have variability in recruitment and to have variability in spawning stock biomass, et cetera, affected by both fishing mortality and natural mortality and environmental conditions. But as the time series has progressed and natural mortality has increased and temperatures have increased and fishing pressure has decreased, those external factors, those natural factors of temperature and predation are having more of an impact on the stock, and the stock is seeing stronger lows in the recruitment, as well as continued increased predation pressure that seems to be impacting the ability of the stock to sustain itself even at very low levels of fishing pressure. So there does seem to be sort of a shift over time as these conditions have worsened, where prior to this, fishing pressure and natural mortality were sort of working together on the stock to control the stock, and both were having an impact on the stock dynamics. But more recently, it seems to be predominantly driven by environmental conditions, including that predation effect.
Thanks, Katie. I think you'll also see Katie's going to present some projections in a few minutes, and using different levels of fishing pressure and natural mortality, so you'll be able to see the impacts of both in those projections.
Okay, you all set, Steve?
Yep, thank you. I just had to unmute.
Yep. Tony, any other hands?
I don't see any other hands from section. Actually, no other hands.
All right, I'll open it up to the public. Any in the public that has a question?
Just give it 1 second for the public to have an opportunity. Put your hand up, and for the members of the public that have not been on this platform, if you just click on the icon that looks like a hand, you should be able to raise your hand. And currently there are no hands up. Okay, I have a hand here from Chuck Plummer.
Chuck, go ahead. You got the floor.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Thank you. I'm from South Bristol, which is the the eastern side of where the trap fishery, where they collected data 2 or 3 years ago for the DMR. And so, you know, what I'm hearing is there might not be any money for the trawl survey. So I'm sort of just would like to put it out there that you know, if we couldn't, maybe the trap fishery could collect data this year, and at least I don't think people would need to be paid, but if they could just keep what shrimp they caught and report the data back to Maggie, I mean, at least so there would be some type of data coming in. And I mean, that's what I'd like to see, is just a limited trap data type of scenario. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Maggie, would you like to comment on, you know, the type of data that type of a proposal would produce?
Sure. We always like to get more data. We have found that, you know, the very limited winter research projects with just a few people, the data are kind of hard to interpret because location is so important, and your choice of the fisherman is important. So, you know, if you're going to do something like that, it would be best if it were pretty widespread, I think. Thank you. Thanks, Chuck. Nice to hear from you.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you both. Tony, any other hands?
I don't see any other hands at this time, Richie.
Okay, we'll move on to the next agenda item. And this will be the management strategy work group update. Cherie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to turn it over to Dustin, as he is the one who put together the presentation. But I can also answer any questions as well as Dustin at the end. Thank you.
Justin, go ahead.
Thanks, Cherie. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just getting my PowerPoint set up. All right, you should be able to see it now, the title screen.
Yes, Dustin, we can see it. Thank you.
All right, well, as it has been introduced, I will be covering the Northern Shrimp Management Strategy Work Group update, and then Cherie will help me with facilitating questions and discussion on that. So I'm going to bring your memory back to November 2018, when this work group was first tasked by the section. This is when the motion was made to move to establish a work group made up of section and plan development team members to adjust management strategies based on ASMFC policy regarding changes in species abundance and distribution resulting from climate change. So it took a little while to get this work group underway, as there was staff transitioning, but we did meet 4 times through 2020 and through 2021. And essentially this work group was looking to address the ongoing issue of the stock status, combined with the fact that it seemed to be fairly unresponsive to the moratorium. As Maggie just presented on, the 2021 stock assessment update indicates that the stock remains depleted, and this is despite the fact that the fishing moratorium has been in place since 2014. And we're currently looking at the 3-year moratorium that's scheduled to expire in this year. So essentially the stock has been unresponsive to decreased fishing mortality, and the section will need to either continue the moratorium, reopen the fishery and set specifications for 2022, or consider a new management strategy, which takes into consideration the biological, economic, and cultural importance of the stock. So determining an appropriate management strategy is challenging, given the stock status and how it remains very poor and at low levels, even under the moratorium, even with one of the most restrictive management tools that the section has at their disposal. So with this tasking, this section met and came up with a number of different management scenarios for section consideration. I'll introduce them here, and then over the next few slides explain a little bit more about them. So there's the continuation of the fishing moratorium, a personal use fishery, a commercial fishery that operates under the existing fishery management plan, and an economically driven commercial fishery. In the briefing materials, there was a table that presented a number of challenges, benefits of each approach, as well as some considerations, some ongoing questions for fully fleshing any of these concepts out. So I'll start off with the continuation of the fishing moratorium. Essentially, the current moratorium would remain in place, and we would continue to monitor for signs of improving stock health. As has been discussed earlier at this meeting, one of the biggest questions is, will survey funding continue? With the summer survey being a very important factor for determining stock health, there would need to be some considerations about what other survey data, would there be sufficient data already out there to continue to monitor the stock's status. Another challenge with this approach is with the fishery in a moratorium, there is economic value lost, and the cultural heritage of this important and much loved fishery is lost with just a continuation of that moratorium. There are benefits, however, namely the ecosystem benefits that shrimp provide as forage. They support a number of different valuable commercial finfish, as we know with the different predation that occurs on this stock. And the moratorium offers the best chance of rebuilding, and it aligns with Magnuson-Stevens Act National Standard 1. I've included National Standard 1 below, but essentially the concept is maintaining conservation and management measures that give the stock the best chance to rebuild and prevent overfishing and bring a stock out of an overfished state. So moving on to the personal use fishery concept. In other words, this would be a personal consumption only fishery with no commercial sale of shrimp. And so this could be accomplished in a number of ways, but the work group kind of honed in on potentially a trap only fishery with a small possession limit, limited season. And one of the challenges with this approach that is consistent with some of the other options that's considered is concerns about National Standard 1, whether this aligns with that standard. There's also concerns about enforcement, since it's a personal consumption only with no commercial sale of shrimp. It might be challenging to prevent peddling from occurring. And then another consideration is controlling participation. Each state would need to figure out how to administer their permitting or licensing. There are benefits with this approach. As I've talked about earlier, there is cultural value in opening the stock up again in New England. And this management approach has the potential to have a smaller impact on the stock, which is beneficial. The third alternative that was discussed was the commercial fishery operates under the existing fishery management plan. This would be a very limited fishery compared to what had previously been implemented, just as a result of the size of the stock. But we would continue to use existing management tools such as fishing seasons, trip limits, trap limits, and days out of the fishery that have been specified in Amendment 3 and Addendum 1 to the FMP. There are challenges. There's likely to be a negative impact on the stock. Katie will be going over projections later on, and so that'll be a little bit more apparent after we review that. Again, there's National Standard 1 concerns, and this also would conflict with the rebuilding plan and giving the stock the best chance to rebuild. There are benefits, however. There will likely be some economic benefits, although revenue might be limited by just the depleted nature of the stock. There may be opportunities to have fishery-dependent monitoring and data collected that would increase the understanding of the stock. And then also this fishery would provide a diversified income stream for harvesters who may be fishing less for other species during that time of the year when this fishery is usually persecuted. Then lastly, the work group talked about the economically driven commercial fishery. And essentially, harvesters would decide their own level of fishing effort. This would be based on a personal calculation of the cost of fishing weighed against the revenue they expect to earn. We imagine that it would likely be a little bit of a trial and error period where fishermen see how well they can do, and then depending on their harvest, they determine whether it's worth going out again. There would be very limited use of traditional management measures. It'd be more of a hands-off approach. So clearly there are some substantial concerns about Magnuson-Stevens Act National Standard 1 with this approach, the greater risk of further depletion of the stock, and as well as the potential loss of ecosystem services. Not only do finfish rely on the stock, but there's likely other marine mammals and other animals that rely on shrimp to support the ecosystem. There's also benefits to this approach. It is a simple management scheme. There may not be as much administrative and resources that are needed to run this type of fishery, and it would maintain fishery access. Oops. So after discussing these different management scenarios and talking about considerations, things that may need to be fleshed out further, the work group discussed with the TC. A little bit more of a detailed report is available in the briefing materials. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. But essentially, the work group wanted to put forward these 4 options, but prior to just letting the section discuss all of them in equal turn, the work group did want to acknowledge that they do not recommend the economically driven commercial fishery option. I've kind of already covered the big reasons, but to reiterate them here, it's the greatest threat to deplete the stock further. It lessens ecosystem services that shrimp provide. And then there are also concerns about National Standard 1, given that part of the fishery operates in federal waters. I've definitely gone over some of these items pretty quickly. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask Sheree and I. We have a number of other work group members on the call. And I apologize that I actually didn't identify them in the presentation, but we also have Megan Ware, Kelly Whitmore, Ray Kane sat in on a number of meetings. And then of course we had Sheree, the chair, and Tony joined the meetings as well. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to you and the section.
Okay, thank you for the report. Any questions, Tony, from the section?
Thanks, Richie. Right now we have Dennis Abbott.
Dennis, go.
Thank you, Richie. Could we have some elaboration on the conflict with the National Standard 1? A little further explanation how that would play out.
Yeah, so the work group discussed this, and part of the reason we actually invited Allison Murphy to join was that it's a little bit unclear as to the exact conflict, seeing as the commission doesn't necessarily, the FMPs don't necessarily fall under the national standard guidelines. There's that kind of take on it, but then also seeing as there are portions of the fishery that operate in federal waters, it was a little unclear as to the full extent at which it would apply. So I might maybe turn it over to Allie or Tony if they have anything more specific to provide.
Yes, Allie, are you on the call? Could you answer that question? Be appreciated.
Allie, you should be able to unmute yourself if you, there you go.
Thank you, Tony. Can you hear me?
Ken, thank you.
Thank you, section and Mr. Chair for the question. Yeah, I think Dustin did a pretty good job of talking about the national standard and how we tend to apply, how we apply National Standard 1 for our Magnuson managed fisheries. I think here, because I think historically a good portion of the fishery is prosecuted in the EEZ and federal waters, our advice has been that the commission, while they don't regularly follow the Magnuson Act and, apply the national standards, here it would be appropriate because of that overlap with federal waters. And in doing so, it would prevent the possibility of any preemptive action by the New England Council or us if there was a disagreement in a decision by the section.
Okay, thank you, Ally. Any section members have questions for Ally? Dennis, do you want any follow-up?
Richie, could I just add one additional thing if that's okay?
Sure, absolutely.
And one of the reasons we originally brought the question to NOAA was that there is that exemption permit for the smaller mesh for the trawl fishery that coincides, I think, with certain groundfish fisheries that the shrimp trawlers get. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever we did moving forward would not impact those exemption permits. And so that's another reason why we brought that question forward to NOAA.
Okay, thank you. Dennis, are you all set?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you. Tony, any other questions?
I don't see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, so next on the agenda would be Katie Drew with projections.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair. Let me make myself presenter here. If possible. Sorry for the delay. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see this now. I'll just be going over some of the projections that we did as a result of the stock assessment. So we did both long-term projections and short-term projections for this, where long-term was 50 years projecting the population out to see kind of what would happen under different natural mortality and recruitment scenarios where fishing mortality was held at 0. And then we did short-term projections, which were only 5 years out, looking at different natural mortality and recruitment scenarios, as well as some different fishing mortality scenarios. So both fishing mortality set to 0 and also a couple of different options of low fishing mortality levels. The M scenarios that we looked at were the recent natural mortality, meaning the mean of the last 5 years of observed natural mortality, so 2015 through 2019, and as well as sort of the time series mean of the entire 1984 to 2019 series of observed natural mortality. And so this is the predation pressure index that we use to scale natural mortality. So the average is set to 1 because it's scaled to the long-term average. As then the recent time period is this higher level of predation pressure. The last 2 years of the data, 2020 and 2021, are not observed. We get the predation pressure index from the Northeast Fishery Science Center's fall trawl survey, which is usually a year behind our assessment because the fall series is usually happening as we are doing the assessment. And of course, it did not occur in 2020. So these 2 points here are the average of the last 3 years of the observed predation pressure index, and they weren't used as part of the recent time period. We just focused on the 5 year of observed data. And so what you can see is this basically shifts the time series natural mortality. This is mortality as a function of shrimp length. So the smallest shrimp have the highest natural mortality, and it follows that Lorenzen curve down where larger shrimp have lower natural mortality rates. And so the time series natural mortality is in yellow with the triangles here, and then the recent natural mortality has been higher for all sizes of shrimp. Similarly, for recruitment, we used the most recent 11 years of observed recruitment from 2011 to 2021, and the time series recruitment was based on the median and standard deviation of the entire time series of observed recruitment. And so if we look at the recruitment deviations that the model is estimating, you can see that from 2011 to now, we basically have a period of below average recruitment. We've been in this low recruitment regime, and that was used to inform the most recent period of recruitment for these scenarios versus using the entire time series and drawing from a distribution of this entire time series. And so again, if you compare the sort of distribution of recruitment that we're using to run these scenarios, you can see that the time series value is this orange distribution that is centered around a higher value and has more higher values and a wider range of values than the recent recent recruitment, which is centered around this lower recruitment level and is a more narrow distribution. So those are the two recruitment scenarios, M and recruitment scenarios that we used, and we used a combination, we used a combination of these scenarios to get 4 total scenarios where we're looking at your time series natural mortality and your time series recruitment, which is a scenario that has the lower natural mortality and higher recruitment. The time series natural mortality and the recent recruitment, which is a lower natural mortality scenario, but also a lower recruitment scenario. The recent natural mortality time scenario and the time series recruitment, which is kind of that flip-flop of it's the higher natural mortality scenario, but a higher recruitment scenario as well. And then the recent M and the recent recruitment scenario, which gives you that higher natural mortality and lower recruitment scenario. And so when we do these long-term projections, you can see that the population stabilizes over time. In the gray and black here, we have sort of the time series of what the population has done in the past down to the terminal year of the assessment in 2021, and then projecting out for another 50 years. You can see that the population stabilizes, but where it stabilizes depends on your assumptions about natural mortality and recruitment. So again, with the long-term projections, we're using no fishing mortality. So this is just if you leave the stock alone, where is it going to stabilize? And so if we're able to return to your average natural mortality and your average recruitment, then the population will stabilize somewhere around where it stabilized in the past. Which is this yellowish bar up here. But if we go back to, if we continue at our recent levels of natural mortality and low recruitment, the population is going to continue to decline, but stabilize at low levels below where we are in 2021. And then if you kind of end up somewhere in the middle in terms of, lower natural mortality, but also lower recruitment, or higher natural mortality, but higher recruitment, you'll stabilize somewhere in between those two extremes. So if we zoom in a little bit on those long-term projections, you can see this sort of happening. You see that divide from the beginning of the projections in 2021, where as you have higher recruitment coming into the population begins to recover, whereas if you keep kind of that lower recruitment and lower natural mortality, the population continues to decline even in the short term. So for the short-term projections, we used the same M and the same recruitment scenarios, but we looked at 3 different F scenarios. So the first scenario was no fishing mortality at all, F equals 0. The second scenario was based on the average fishing mortality of what we're calling the research period, which was basically 2014 to 2018. And that was a very low F of about 0.0224 split between the trap and the trawl fishery based on sort of the historic proportions of fishing mortality that both of those fleets contributed during the active fishery period. And then the third option was a slightly higher F. That was the maximum F we saw during the research period, but only using the trap fishery. And so I think what you can see here is we've broken up. So this is the trajectory of the median spawning stock biomass for each scenario. So each panel is a scenario, and then each line is an F rate. And so what you can see is what's really driving the trend of the population is not really the F rate, but what level of M and recruitment we would expect to see. So this is the same as we saw during the F equals 0 long-term projections, that with the recent natural mortality and recent recruitment levels, the population will continue to decline with both 0 and low levels of fishing. Whereas reversing one of those trends, having either lower natural mortality or higher recruitment will allow the population to start to rebuild a bit, and having both lower natural mortality and higher recruitment gives you a strong positive trend. And this is where we start to see some differences in the fishing mortality rate having an impact on the results, where the F equals 0 is recovering slightly faster than these scenarios that have some level of fishing mortality. And so if we look at sort of what's your probability of being above SSB, those lines were just based on the overall central tendency of the projection. I think what you can see is that the probability of being above where we were in 2021 is basically less than 1% for your current conditions. Whereas as your conditions improve under better natural mortality and better recruitment scenarios, the probability of being above where you were in 2021 increases. And you do see a little bit more of an effect of those fishing mortality rates, where the F equals 0 is having a higher probability of recovering and recovering sooner, or increasing and increasing sooner than the values with the low, even the slightly low F. So in terms of kind of what you can expect out of a fishery under these F scenarios, this table is just focused on recent natural mortality and recent recruitment, because we think those are the most likely conditions to persist in the near term in the next few years. Comparing your 2022 catch with your 2026 catch, so the catch at the end of the projections, and comparing your 2021 SSB with your 2026 SSB, so where you started and where you end up. And so you can see in all of these scenarios, from F equals 0 to F equals 0.5, you do end up at a lower SSB than you do in 2021. And your overall catch also declines over this period. So these projections are based on keeping a constant F rate applied to the population, and therefore as the population declines, you're taking a smaller and smaller amount out of that population in order to maintain that same F rate. So for the F equals the average of the research period, you're starting out at about 7.9 metric tons in both fisheries combined, and then you end up at about 4.8 metric tons for both fisheries combined. Under the F equals 0.05, that's the maximum of the research period applied only to the trawl fishery, only to the trap fishery. You start out at about 21 metric tons and then decline to about 11.9 metric tons in order to maintain that constant F. If you were maintaining a constant catch, your catch would remain the same, but your F rate would go up and your spawning stock biomass would decline further as you take out a higher and higher percentage of the population with that constant catch. So I'm going to pause here before I move on to recommendations and see if there's any questions about the projections. But if not, I can move on to the TC recommendations.
Okay, any questions for Katie on this section?
Mr. Chair, you have two hands raised, Mike Armstrong followed by Steve Train.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Katie. Could you refresh me? I think you said it sometime during the presentation. M is calculated how? Is that based on the predation index?
So yes, we use sort of a baseline Lorenzen curve for shrimp. So basically based on the size at age of, or the size of shrimp, and we calculate what natural mortality is, and that's what gives you that declining curve of going from high natural mortality on the smallest shrimp to lower natural mortality on the oldest shrimp. And the natural mortality at the oldest shrimp, sort of in your base case, is set at 0.25, which is what the value is that we actually had measurements of when we did some empirical studies back in the day. So that curve then is shifted up and down over time by multiplying by the predation pressure index. So that it's a combination of what size the shrimp are and then combined with the level of predation the population is experiencing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Steve, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Drew. I have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. One is, why did you not run heavier fishing pressure studies, considering traditionally the fishery was a lot more than the last few years while we were shut down, just to see what the numbers were? Second question is, on your, I believe your last slide, your last two slides, where would the error bars be on those numbers? Is the catch tonnage within where the error bars would be if they were shown on the chart? Thank you.
So for the first question, we didn't run any more aggressive catch levels because we weren't sure what the section's feelings, our thoughts on that were. In terms of our understanding was that the section was considering potentially a small level fishery, but was not considering going back to a full active fishery the way we would have seen in the past. And given the fact that even under no fishing pressure, under the current conditions, we saw the stock declining. We didn't feel there was a lot of information in that. If the section is interested in seeing alternative scenarios, we can definitely redo those projections and bring them back to you with higher or lower levels of F. So this was just based on kind of our understanding of what the section was considering at the time. And in terms of like the error bars, I'm not sure what you mean by, so this is sort of this is showing what's the probability of being above SSB or not. So this is based on the number of runs. So in some of these runs, you do have a small probability, even under recent conditions, you do have a small probability of being above SSB in 2021. So for example, if we have a few good year classes come through, you know, in some of those runs, a few unusually good year classes, there's a low probability that the stock will increase even with low fishing mortality rates. In terms of I think maybe you're asking, you know, on, was it this table, like, you know, is 436 and 423 within the confidence bounds of that 444 metric tons? Yeah, I would say most likely these trajectories would overlap a little bit in terms of, you know, is 436 that different from 444? We did not look at sort of, I don't have the confidence intervals to show you on that here, but definitely there is a little bit of overlap between kind of the F0 scenario and the low levels of F, that if you have more positive environmental conditions, or you know, resource conditions, more positive recruitment over the next couple of years, then you know, you could end up in a situation where these are roughly equivalent SSBs. Is that what you were trying to get at?
I believe so. Confidence intervals, I think when I looked at a chart, we used to put them all on there years ago, and we called them the error bars. You know, you drew the line down through the middle. So I think you called them confidence intervals, but they're the same thing. And thank you for your answers.
Okay, Tony, any other hands?
I don't see any other hands at this time, Richie.
Okay, Katie, if you would proceed, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll go on to the TC recommendations, which are very straightforward. The TC recommends that the moratorium on all fishing be extended, including the moratorium on research trips. This is because of the poor stock status and resource conditions. So we're talking low abundance, unfavorable environmental conditions, and high predation levels. The TC doesn't see a biological justification for harvest based on kind of the FMP objectives, which are to maintain shrimp stock at a sustainable level that will support a viable fishery and minimize the impacts on the other resources, such as shrimp predators. So we didn't see any levels of fishing mortality that would not cause the stock to decline further, even recognizing that even in the absence of fishing and the current environmental conditions, the stock will continue to decline. And so we didn't think that we could define any fishery as sustainable and producing a viable fishery, as well as, you know, the benefits that shrimp provide as prey would be impacted by accelerating that decline through harvest. So that's the TC recommendations, and I and/or Maggie or other TC members can provide some additional comments on this if people have questions.
Okay, thank you, Katie. That was very thorough, as usual. So I just to go back to your two recommendations, I have a question.
I don't have any hands right now, Richie.
Okay, I have a question. If you could get back to the last two recommendations, the last slide. There you go. Thank you. So, Katie, this would then include a recreational limited pot fishery for personal use that would provide, you know, a small amount of mortality, but would provide some mortality. So your recommendations would include that type of fishery as well.
So, right, the TC feels that given the current FMP objectives, there is no level of fishery that meets those objectives. So I think the question of how the section wants to define sustainable or viable fishery, or, you know, minimizing impacts on other resources, that kind of risk and uncertainty question starts to move into more what the section is comfortable with and what they feel the objectives of the plan are. The TC doesn't feel there's a biological justification for increasing removals at any level.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
1 second. We have a hand raised from a member of the public. I don't know if you're taking.
Yes, I will. I was going to wait until we had actual after advisory and a motion, but if the hand's raised, let's take it from the public.
Okay. It's Chuck Plummer. And hold on 1 second, Chuck. There you go. You should be unmuted.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I can wait if you want me to.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. You're on. Let's go ahead and ask it.
This shrimp business, it's been managed for 7 or 8 years with no fishing whatsoever, and it's at a level that fishing mortality hasn't affected it. But I would really like to see a limited trap fishery of, say, 10 shrimp traps per person or something, just so we have an idea of what's happening, because that's what I'd like to see. I mean, they can put a quota on it or whatever, but that's I don't know. That's what I'm hoping for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. We'll be getting to that when we do the specifications, there'll be motions, various options, and certainly going to allow the public to comment on those options, but thank you in advance for that. So next is Mr. Libby for the advisory panel report.
Okay, Dustin had a PowerPoint for me. He was going to bring up.
Yep, just getting that up. All right. Take it away, Gary. Just tell me when you want me to change slides and I'll do that.
Okay, once you change it to the first one, I'm just going to read through it and then let them know what we did. We held the meeting yesterday. We only had 4 members in attendance. We got the same stock assessment review you all did today, which we pretty much felt the same way you're feeling probably. Okay, go to the next slide. And recognizing that this moratorium, where we've had a flat line over the last few years, doesn't seem to be working very well as a stock rebuilding thing. And so we went into a long conversation about what we could do about that. And it ended up the AP was supporting a survey of commercial harvesters, like just have fishermen go out and do it instead of spending the money for the survey. And AP members could conduct the survey more efficiently, we felt, than because that's what a lot of the fishermen in the talk around the dock that I hear, that they, as soon as they hear how the survey comes out, they go, what? How can that be? So we thought if fishermen had a hand in it, they may feel that the survey results or any results that come out, they had a piece of it and they'd understand that it was in poor shape or good shape or whatever shape it happens to end up being. And that leads right into this last point where we question whether the survey is accurate or healthy. Okay, next slide. Some of the AP members supported 20 traps a couple days a week, which is similar to what we just heard from Chuck. Opening up for personal use fishery could become problematic for enforcement because we thought, depending on how much quota you allowed in this personal use fishery, there would be an incentive to try to sell a few off to the side, which has been discussed. So we agreed with that. Next slide. And some of us prefer a limited commercial fishery opposed to the personal use fishery because of that way you'd be able to sell a little bit of the product, and then you'd be able to get some more data into the model. So maybe we could help by putting more stuff in there, the more, because Maggie said to me earlier, like she said today, more data is better. So that was the reason for thinking a small fishery with very low shrimp limit. And then we had one person that was pretty concerned that you guys wouldn't accept any fishery at all. Okay, next slide. Then we go into the small research set-aside fisheries, which AP supported that they should be able to sell the shrimp if they do that, which leads into that very limited fishery. And 10-day season low shrimp limits was suggested. Level of landings will help answer the question whether there's a disconnect between the summer survey and what the commercial harvesters can get. And use it as a research tool. That's pretty much what we decided. So next slide, if there is one. There it is. comments on February 22. Two members thought it was too late to implement something other than a moratorium this year. Should be planned for next year. Two members thought that something could be implemented for this year. It really depends on what type of management system the section wants to implement. So it's pretty much, we saw the stock assessment just like you did, and you can see that it's very poor with the information we have now. I think most of our push was to add information into it and try to help that way, even if it means taking out a few more shrimp. It may be beneficial in the long run. Oh, next slide. Where are we? Was that it? I guess that's it. I guess I can take some questions now.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Any questions? Tony?
I'm just waiting to see if I have any hands. One hand from Dennis Abbott.
Okay, Dennis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Libby, thank you for your meeting yesterday. I listened to the entirety of it and appreciated everything that I heard and shared the same concerns that you do have. But one thing I would like to ask Katie or Maggie to comment on is the concern about, and what would be the ramifications of outsourcing the survey and the intent of them somehow achieving better results. I think we need to have some better understanding of why we do things the way we do things, and not change doing things in any other way. Thanks.
Well, I'll take a stab at that, Dennis. This is Maggie. We do use industry vessels for the Maine, New Hampshire inshore trawl survey, and that data has been very useful. I think I did show that earlier. It's important that if you do have industry doing the survey, that it's just done the same way every year. You know, it could certainly work, and we have had some success with that inshore survey, but you can't have a different boat doing it every year, or, you know, a different gear, or you also have to have a very set protocol on how you choose your stations. You can't have, you know, the captain say, well, I think I'll try over here this year, and next year he says, well, that didn't work out very well, I think I'll try somewhere else the next year, because then you're comparing apples with oranges, and if you see an increase or a decline in your stock, you won't know whether it was because you looked in a different place or because the overall Gulf of Maine stock was declining. And unfortunately, that's the question that we have. We need to know how the whole stock is doing, not just what can be caught in Portland or what can be caught off of Stonington. So yes, certainly an industry survey can work, but it has to be done very consistently from year to year.
Okay, Dennis, you all set?
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. That's what I wanted to hear.
Okay, any other questions, Tony?
I don't have any other section members with their hands up.
Okay. Any questions from the public? And please, questions, because you'll get a chance to comment on any motions that come up. So any questions for the advisory panel?
Right now, I just have one. It's Ben Martins.
Ben, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Libby, as well. This is maybe more of a question for Maggie than for the AP, but for the comments that Maggie just made about the idea that we kind of need to have these surveys being perfect, when at the same time we're talking about losing some of these surveys because of funding. So I guess maybe that's a bigger question that to the AP, you know, their recommendations on how we start to collect better data and use fishermen to collect data. But I guess I was a little shocked that the answer to that question was that we need perfect surveys when our surveys are about to disappear. So I don't know, maybe there's not a question there, but I was just a little struck by that, and I thought the AP's recommendations on that were kind of important to think through. But maybe Maggie can talk a little bit about the data needs of the surveys moving forward and what would happen if we lost those surveys without the catch data that we haven't had for quite some time either.
Maggie?
Well, I'm happy if you think our current surveys are perfect. But no, you don't need a perfect survey. You need an extensive survey. Like I tried to show in that 2020 trapping project how different the results were just within a 12-mile stretch of coast. And we, of course, that map we put up of the summer survey, you can see that there were some areas where you caught shrimp and some areas where you didn't. But you do want to have a widespread, to cast a broad net when you do a survey, and get just as many stations as you can. The more stations you can visit, the better idea you'll have how the stock is doing. That's all I was trying to say there.
You all set, Ben?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Tony?
Yes, we have Mike Armstrong.
Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. For Gary, could you expand that? One of your slides said the AP opposes a personal use harvest. Was that everyone on the AP? I know there are only 4, but did everyone oppose it? And could you expand on the reasons why?
We opposed that. 3 of us. One of us wanted it, and 3 of us opposed it because of the illegal sale, possible illegal sale of the shrimp under the personal use, and also the enforcement issues that would come up with it. They'd have to be monitored quite closely to make sure they weren't bringing in more shrimp than they were supposed to, and it'd be an incentive because there's a really big demand in the public to try to get some of those shrimp to eat. So we thought it would be opening up a can of worms to have personal use with potential illegal sale of that shrimp, and thought it was like a dangerous area to take more shrimp out than what we should with a personal use.
Thank you.
You all set, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Tony, any other hands?
Steve Train.
Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder, has enforcement weighed in on that at all, on that fear? Is that something that they see as a problem? Does anybody know?
Well, I'm not sure, Steve. When we came up with it, I think it was just a personal history and thinking about fishermen not being able to go for 6, 7 years, and finally being able to go, and the neighbor bugging them for a bucket full of shrimp or a tray of shrimp. Depends on what they're allowed, I guess. If they're allowed, a tray of shrimp was what was thrown out at us by the member that wanted it, and we thought a tray of shrimp was quite a lot. If it was 15 pounds of shrimp, then maybe not so much. But the one guy said even if you did have a limited commercial fishery, then it still might be a personal use because you may not get many with that stock assessment.
You all set, Steve?
Yeah, so that was a personal thing. There's no enforcement report on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, any further hands?
Yes, we have Megan Ware. And just to be clear, since the AP just had their meeting yesterday, we wouldn't have had an opportunity to talk to law enforcement about it. I will say that Delane Brown is on the call, so if you want him to respond, you can call on him.
Steve?
I certainly wouldn't mind hearing from enforcement on if that fear is justified in their opinion.
Okay. Lieutenant, would you like to respond, please?
Sure, as always, I'd like an opportunity to review what the technical committee came up with. and also bring it to the members of the law enforcement committee, but I can't see how, if the technical committee says they can't see any biological reason to open it, how it would make any sense to open it by any means.
Okay, thank you. Any further hands, Tony?
Yeah, Megan had her hand up.
Okay, Megan?
Thanks. I just wanted to comment a bit on the enforcement aspect, and Mr. Chair, you can ask me to hold this if it's steering more into a territory you want to hold off on until motions. But after the AP meeting, I actually had a meeting with our colonel and 2 lieutenants here in Maine DMR to specifically talk about this enforcement issue since it came up at the AP. And what I heard from them is kind of the effort you allow and the limit you set at is what's going to be really important there in determining the incentive for peddling. So if you're setting it at a low level that reflects personal use, there's not going to be, I'll say, extra to be passing around. So I'll have a motion forthcoming, but at the levels that are in this motion, not to spill the beans here, but they did not express concerns about peddling, and I'll talk about that a bit more when I get to that.
Okay, thank you. Tony, any other hands?
Yes, Sheree Patterson.
Go ahead, Sheree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just wanted to talk about a recreational harvest of shrimp and how that would be any different from a law enforcement perspective on, say, recreational harvest of lobster. We have recreational harvest for other species that is always a concern with, but yeah, we still have those recreational fisheries that are enforced by law enforcement. So I guess I'm kind of confused how that would be any different with a recreational shrimp fishery than per se a recreational lobster. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm unfortunately unable to raise my hand, but I thought maybe a point of discussion that was had at the AP meeting yesterday might be helpful with Sheree's question, because this did come up with the scallop fishery, how there is a recreational fishery and a commercial fishery, and how that would differ actually from northern shrimp, which would just be implemented as a recreational fishery. So I guess that when there is no commercial sale allowed whatsoever, I think the AP members were talking about some concerns about how that could become an illegal activity. But when you have a recreational fishery and a commercial fishery, participants have a legal means to sell the product, and so there'd be less concerns about like an illegal market.
Okay, thank you. Any further hands?
No hands at this time.
Okay, I think maybe we're starting to get into discussion that will probably take place after a motion is on the table. So Megan, you said you had a motion that we could get started with that.
Sure, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to start us off, and maybe I'll just start by kind of stating the obvious here. But I think we have a stock where high natural mortality and high predation are what's preventing rebuilding, and it's frustrating and unfortunate that we've been in a moratorium for 7 years, and we really aren't in a better position today than we were when the moratorium started. And based on the environmental data I'm seeing, I'm not expecting additional years of a moratorium to suddenly change the winds here and we be able to rebuild this stock. So I think that leaves this section in a really difficult and tough position about where to move forward. I know DMR continues to be interested in a limited commercial fishery. I also know that there is not enough support around this table for that option. So given that's kind of off the table, I don't see a continued moratorium changing our stock condition. I'm willing to try the path that's in the middle here and allow for a small personal use fishery. I think the projections that Katie showed show very little difference in the stock trajectories between allowing no harvest and a small level of harvest that we might expect under a personal use fishery. I'll also note that as we've kind of alluded to, we have a series of research recommendations from our benchmark assessment that we really haven't been able to address because we don't have recent fishery dependent data. We've learned we have a summer survey that's in jeopardy, I'll say, in terms of funding. And so I think allowing for a small level of harvest would provide an opportunity to collect some samples and do it in a way that, unlike an RSA, doesn't force a state to pick winners and losers. I think it's been interesting to hear Maggie talk about how location can be just as important a factor in the resulting data as the biomass of shrimp that may be out there. And I think this is a way to kind of avoid those impacts. So I have a motion that I sent to staff, and when that's up on the screen, I will read it. And if I get a second, I'd like to speak a little bit more to this enforcement issue. But move to continue a commercial fishery moratorium for northern shrimp and establish a northern shrimp personal use fishery in 2022. The personal use fishery would be defined as a 2-week season of February 14th through 28th, 2022. Traps can be set starting 1 week prior on February 7th, 2022. A trap fishery with a 3-trap limit per permit holder. A trip limit of 1 5-gallon bucket of whole shrimp, which is about 25 pounds per vessel per trip per day. The commercial sale of northern shrimp is prohibited, and that in 2022, we convene a work group of section members, ASMFC staff, and NOAA to discuss what relinquishing management of northern shrimp looks like and associated ramifications.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Is there a second to this motion?
Yes, Cherie seconds the motion.
Okay, Cherie. All right, Megan, if you want to elaborate.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of topics that have come up, and I don't want to be hogging the mic here, but I think the one that seems to keep coming up is enforcement. And as I mentioned, I think the easiest way to stop peddling is to set a trip limit that's low enough that actually reflects a level of personal use. And I think a 3-trap limit and 25 pounds of whole shrimp, so that's still with the head and shell on, represents a level of personal use. I did have conversations with our Marine Patrol yesterday, and I think as Cherie alluded to, they didn't see any heightened concerns about illegal activity compared to other fisheries. And I'll note that striped bass is a fishery, at least in Maine, maybe in New Hampshire as well, where it's recreational only. There is no commercial sale. So I don't think northern shrimp is unique in that way. And then I'll also note, if someone is caught peddling, the commissioner has authority to suspend licenses, and that can be a powerful disincentive, particularly if someone's lobster license is on the line. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Cherie, would you like to talk as a seconder?
No, I agree with all that Megan had indicated and don't have any more to add. Thanks.
Okay. I have one question before I'll open it up. This would be to Allie. This would produce even limited, but some mortality on a depleted stock. And is there any sense that National Fisheries Service might take any action based on this? And would that action be a limitation in federal waters? So I know this is hard issue to have a direct answer, but if you could give any sense, Allie, that would be appreciated.
Allie, I think you can go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a good question, and I'm at this point, this is the first time I'm seeing the proposal here, so I haven't, shopped this around and had a discussion with folks about this. I was intending to make public comment when you were accepting public comment in support of the full moratorium to keep the fishery completely closed, as I think that kind of best aligns with the requirements of National Standard 1 to promote rebuilding, as well as National Standard 2, which is about the best scientific information available. And I think the TC presented some, or members of the TC presented some really good data to you all today. That said, I will also say this looks to be a pretty limited personal use opening of the fishery. So if this does pass, I'll certainly be discussing this and passing this along to General Counsel and other folks who might be interested.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now I'll open it up for comments from the section.
Mr. Chair, I had Cherie followed by Mike Armstrong, Megan Ware, and Ray Kane.
Okay, Cherie.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my hand was stuck up from before. I just dropped it. Thank you.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you. I got a few questions, but I'll start with one for Megan. I mean, we saw that 5 or 7 metric tons didn't change the trajectory too much. So what do you anticipate that the harvest would be, and how do you go about calculating that?
Can I tackle that one? This is Maggie. I'm sorry, I don't have a way to raise my hand.
Please do.
This is Megan. I'm happy to answer that question.
Go ahead, Megan, and then Maggie after Megan.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair question, Mike. And so what I did, obviously you have to make some assumptions, but I'm going to use the worst case scenario assumptions to give you that, and then you can change these assumptions as you multiply the 3 numbers to what you think is reasonable. But I was looking through the benchmark assessment. The highest number of trapped fishermen ever recorded in Maine was 143. So I'll use that as a worst case scenario of 143 participants. I think that's high, but again, worst case scenario. I'll say that they land the full trip limit every trip, so 25 pounds. And then I'll say that I'll assume they go 3 times a week based on weather and also the need for traps to soak. That comes out to 9.7 metric tons. So you can change those values as you want, and you'll get presumably lower numbers depending how you're changing them. But I think this is a pretty low, or this is of the projections that the TC did, this falls within that lower option.
Megan, just if I could follow up.
Go ahead.
So you did 143 times 25 pounds per trip times what was the last one? It's 2 weeks times 3 a week. Is that right?
Yeah, for 2 weeks. So it was 143 times 25 times 6, and then I converted that into metric tons.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So 6 was the last number.
Yeah.
I'll let someone else go. I'll probably raise my hand again. Thanks.
Hi, this is Maggie. I just did a quick set up a little worksheet to do this, and I just had put in 100 fishermen, and I got 7 metric tons. And I'd be happy to put in some different numbers if you want to play around with it. But I did want to mention that is around the second, the F in the second scenario that Katie presented in the projection section, and it did result in the SSB after the 5th year being somewhat lower than the SSB if you had no fishing at all. So I just wanted to mention that any level of fishing does reduce the stock more than no fishing does. And I also wanted to mention that people have said that the moratorium didn't work, and I'd like to suggest that it has helped preserve the stock at a higher level than it certainly would have been if you had fisheries. So anyway, I'll be quiet now. But if you want to run some different numbers, I've got that set up.
Okay, thanks, Maggie. That's helpful. Who's next? Tony?
I think it was Megan. I hope I'm putting that in the right order.
You have anything more, Megan?
I was going to respond to the National Standard 1 comment, but I've spoke a lot, so I'm happy to go to the end of the line and others can speak.
Okay, who's next?
Then I had Ray.
Okay,
Yes.
Ray?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question to Megan. So you're talking about a high number of 143. So will the state of Maine be limiting access so that, you know, we're running these numbers? So will the state, if this motion were to be approved, would the state limit the number of permit holders? Because there might be a run on recreational or whatever you call it in the state of Maine. Trap fishery. There might be a run on permits, in which case all these numbers get skewed. That's a question to Megan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Good morning. What we've talked about in state is creating a non-commercial northern shrimp permit that would be at no cost to individuals, so that we would know the number of participants and have a way to enforce a reporting requirement. That would not be, or that would be an open access permit. So, you know, that's out there for your thoughts, but I think the 143 is a high estimate, to be frank. I mean, if that's the highest number of trap fishermen we saw when this stock was at its peak, I suspect we'll see different participation rates at a 3 trap and 5-gallon bucket limit. So I personally think that that's quite high.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so is the state thinking about a hard stop? Because I keep hearing 7,000,000 as a number. So is the state going to implement a hard stop when a certain number is achieved?
I'm not sure what the 7,000 number is, Ray, but can you help me understand what you're getting at with that?
You know, I'd have to look at the table once again, but what was the projected number at 143 permits fishing 3 days a week, 25 pounds a day?
Yeah, it was, I think, 9.5 metric tons.
9.5 metric tons. And so would the state implement a hard stop if this motion were to be passed? Like, say it's caught in the first week, like you're giving them a week to set the gear, then the following week they can start hauling it 3 days a week. So if it were to be filled, you know, we need a hard stop number in this motion where you just say, okay, you can't go that following week. You know, we've hit a tack here. I don't see a hard stop, you know, on, okay, 9.5 tons have been caught, but that's not in this motion.
So Ray, just to clarify, you're suggesting that there be daily reporting then, so that the state would know exactly what the amount was every week?
Yes, thank you, Richie. I mean, I'm supporting what the TC has to say about this, and I understand there's a push in the state of Maine, you know, to have a personal fishery, but I'm not seeing any numbers. So yeah, daily reporting on the days they fish, and we need a hard stop number if this motion were to pass. Thank you.
Megan?
Yeah, you know, I'll say I don't think we were envisioning daily reporting for a personal use fishery. I think that would be a first. as far as I know of. You know, it's hard because we've had a moratorium for so long. I don't think we know what the level of participation will be. Certainly, we can be monitoring the number of permits that are sold and respond accordingly. We will have to be, if this passes, the regulations will have to be implemented as an emergency regulation. So we can always be more conservative than what this states if we feel like the effort is higher than we anticipated. But my understanding with the personal use fishery is that there's no hard tack. You know, a hard tack is for a commercial fishery, which is not what I'm proposing here. I think that it's clear the commercial fishery moratorium is going to continue.
Okay, Megan, I have a question. So this is the benefit of this. The negatives are that it affects the stock to a small degree, but it's still a negative impact on the stock, and it probably has some negative impact ecologically. And on the benefit side, what I saw was cultural. The history of the shrimp fishery has been commercial, not recreational or not personal use. And so I would view this, the benefits are going to go to 100 fishermen or 140 or 80 or whatever that ends up with and their family. And it doesn't seem like the benefits go to the general public. And so I just wonder if you would comment on how you view the benefits of this fishery.
Sure, thanks for the question, Richie. You know, I think it's important to, I guess, speaking to benefits, right? Under a moratorium, the benefits we're getting are the ecosystem services, I'll say, that Northern should provide. And I want to acknowledge those are really important. I think the projections show that a small level of F is not going to change the trajectory of this stock here. So I think under a personal use fishery, you get those same ecosystem services that you were getting under a moratorium, but you also get these social benefits. Northern shrimp, it does have a cultural aspect to New England. You know, people talk about Northern shrimp almost like legend up here, and I think that value, while it's really hard to quantify, it is important to consider kind of that heritage cultural aspect. And I think that's a really important benefit that we get out of this. Again, I respect Ray's opinion on in support of a moratorium. From my perspective, it feels like we've walked the same road for 7 years and we haven't ended up where I thought that road was going to lead us. And so I'm willing to try a slightly different path here and see where that goes.
Okay, thank you. That helps to define it. The next hand, Tony.
Steve Train.
Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to speak in favor of the motion. I don't believe that there is any great risk that we will exceed catch with 3 traps per boat beyond what would be considered the confidence levels in the graphs and charts we saw earlier. And knowing that, I'm in favor of it.
Hey, thank you, Steve. Next, Tony.
Dennis Abbott.
Dennis, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of points here to be made. First of all, Mike Armstrong's question, I think, is really unanswerable. We don't know how many participants there would be if we went in this route. We don't know the weather conditions. We don't know this. We don't know that. So it's a real guesstimate of what a catch could possibly be under a 3-trap limit per permit holder moving forward. As you said earlier, there are social benefits. I think we have to consider also that in the early days of the moratorium, we've had the moratorium now for, is it 7 or 8 years, and the stock hasn't rebounded. But as Maggie said a few moments ago, and as I spoke with her yesterday, that it's a question of the glass being half empty or half full. I mean, we probably wouldn't be at the present stock status had we not implemented a moratorium. So you could say that it's somewhat of a success, even though the stock is not rebuilding. It's just been informative. So we also had a fishery, whatever you want to call it, for the first couple years, which probably took more, did take more shrimp than would possibly be taken under this scenario. This is a big jump for us. I mean, we've been very adamant for all these years about a strict moratorium, but it's gotten us nowhere, essentially. I mean, status quo, so to speak. So I don't think that there's a whole lot of danger in moving ahead with this, and which is a change of thinking on my part, being a strong proponent for all these years to continue the moratorium with no fishery whatsoever. It was also brought up that there's going to be a need for data. If we lose the summer survey, there's probably a need for sampling, which might be helpful to the scientists, whatever. So somewhat reluctantly, I'm willing to support this and take the jump off the cliff and let things happen. There's a year to be working on the finer details of this. I see that Maine, Megan is going to have some work to do about how they're going to implement this. Are they going to have a separate license category? How are they going to take care of it? I think the idea of having daily reporting is a bit much, with possibly a goodly number of people calling in to say that they caught 2 gallons or 3 gallons, got lucky and got 5 gallons or whatever. So I think we should, summation, I think that we should just give this a chance. So I will be voting in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Tony?
I think we're circling back to Mike Armstrong. If you had a follow-up question, your hand was still up.
Yep, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I actually didn't want it up, but now that you've asked, I do have a question. So one of the benefits would be some biological sampling. How do you go about doing that? Are you just going to find cooperative fishermen? I guess for Megan.
Megan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had a conversation, Mike, with our sampling folks a week or two ago to talk about this and what would be possible. And I think what I learned from that is that we are going to have, or we can do some sampling for this. And I think it will be port sampling, so meeting people at the docks, hopefully trying to engage with some of our, I'll call them NGOs, but like fishing community NGOs that we have in Maine, so that if they're able to collect samples and freeze them, we can pick them up from around the state. So I think we are at a point where Maine is committing to do some sampling on this and putting staff time towards it. One of the things that contributed to the 2-week season I've proposed is this is a time where scallop sampling is winding down in the state. And so I think we have some availability with those folks to pick this up as that scallop work is winding down.
Thank you, Megan. Mike, any further?
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just follow up with a comment.
Sure.
So I'm kind of torn. I think you guys know I usually never want to go against what the TC says. So I am torn. I do think the harvest will be fairly trivial, but I worry a little bit about it. Last time the fishery was open for a little bit of research, there were people getting $10 a pound. So each one of those buckets is worth $250. That's quite an incentive to do some peddling, I suppose. That we will never ever record as landings, and that that's been a continuing problem. Is all the cryptic harvest that we've always had, and I do worry that we endanger the stock a little bit. tiny bit, and we're doing it for a group of 100 people, not the general public. So there isn't a whole lot of net benefit to society from doing that. I know that's sort of a strange thing to say, but if this somehow would benefit a whole bunch of the public, I could digest it better. But it's not. It's sort of a private little group that will benefit from it. So anyway, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote. We're going to have to caucus for a few minutes when it comes time. One final thing, I worry about that fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth one about convening a work group. I'd actually like to see that as a separate motion if that's what we want to do. I mean, I don't see us relinquishing management for a long, long time. But anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you, Mike. Any further hands from the section?
We do. You have Sheree Patterson followed by Dennis Abbott.
Okay, Sheree, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might go out to Maggie, this question, in regards to, and I know it's variable, but when have the shrimp been dropping their eggs? Is this prior to egg drop typically, or is this in the middle of egg drop? What's the February 14th to the 28th season going to be for egg drop?
Maggie?
Yes, this is Maggie. It varies very much from place to place, but that should be right around the 50% egg hatch mark for the mid-coast Maine. It would be later down east, say in Stonington, and earlier to the west. That helps you. I also wanted to comment on sampling a personal use fishery, especially if it's a trap fishery. That will, cost staff time, but it also gives us samples that don't have as much information as trawl samples, because traps generally do not catch small shrimp, so it won't give us any idea of what's coming along. So the sampling will be of limited use. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Tony?
Yes, we have Dennis.
Dennis? Yep, go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mike Armstrong's about having any benefit to the general public, and we're prohibiting commercial sale. I think that you'd probably find out that would be bartering going on. There would be, if someone is lucky enough to go fishing and have success in a week, they would probably be handing out shrimp to friends and relatives, and maybe to restaurants in lieu of some consideration or a few meals or something. And would that be considered commercial sale? But I think that if there's shrimp being caught, somehow some amount of them are going to be available to the general public, however limited. And I don't think that we should get too involved in that.
Tony, any further hands?
I don't have any hands right now. I do have a question just for clarification purposes from staff perspective. I think that, Megan, you're intending this to be a trap-only fishery, but it doesn't say traps only anywhere. So I'm just curious for clarification purposes.
Megan?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I think I was trying to be clear with the second bullet, but maybe not successful as a trap fishery. So yeah, this is trap only, a 3 trap limit.
Okay. Is it okay if we write either just a separate bullet that says this is a trap only fishery, or something to that effect in one of these?
Yeah, if that's necessary for the record, I think you could just add the word only in that second bullet.
Maya, could you say this is a trap only fishery with a 3 trap limit per permit holder? Thank you.
Is that okay, Megan?
Yes, thank you.
Cherie, a seconder, is this an okay change?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, Richie, I don't know if you'll be going to the public or not, but
I will.
there was
I
a
will.
public
Yeah.
hand.
Any more hands from the section?
I don't see any other section hands.
Yep, and we can certainly come back to the section. So now open it up to the public for a question or comment. Raise your hand.
Right now I have Gary Libby first.
Gary, go ahead.
Thanks for letting me speak on it. I was one of the ones that was opposed to this in the advisory panel. I think I'd rather see some sort of fishery with be the sale of the shrimp, and that way you could keep track of what was being landed. And that way it would benefit the public more, because the public are the ones that I really think want to have access to these shrimp, not just a few guys that can go out and get a bucket of shrimp and trade it for whatever they want. And if there was to trade it, trading is a value. So that's like selling. That's why I'm opposed to it. I just don't think it's a good idea to do that without involving people from the public to get access, because that's more what it's about. It's a public resource. So that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Tony, next hand.
Vincent Balzano.
Vincent, good to hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Happy holidays. I'm not going to oppose or support this motion. And I know this is going to be more of a comment. It's obvious that the moratorium is not working. And it's obvious that we are going to need some more information about this fishery. The biggest angst I have about everything here, in this motion, trawl is not even mentioned. And if we look back at the history of this fishery, the gear type allocation split is 87-13. So you're denying 87% of this fishery any access, and you're allowing 13% of it in a very small area of the stock, broad stock area, access to these shrimp to get you information. I have issues with what type of information it's going to supply, number one, and I am very supportive and in agreement of a lot of Dr. Armstrong's comments about the benefit to the public, the information that we're going to get, and the equity amongst the traditional participants in this fishery. I thank you all for allowing me to comment. I say hello to all my old friends in shrimp that we haven't gotten together in these recent years, and happy holidays to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Tony, next hand.
I'm not sure if Chuck Plummer's hand keeps going up and down, so I'm not sure if he's having trouble with his hand or not. So I just want to check in with him.
Hello?
Yes, Chuck, go ahead.
Well, I would like to, I don't understand what the big issue is about not being able to sell the shrimp. If there's only 25 pounds of shrimp, you know, projected to be caught, I think if we was able to sell those shrimp, and I really believe there should be some kind of data collected, like a trip report, like they do with lobstering, so that the DMR would know how many shrimp really is being caught. I don't think there's much of a threat of catching that 25 pounds out of 3 traps. That's quite a lot per trap, as I understand it. And so I'd like to be able to sell. Now, when Maggie had the shrimp trappers do a little survey a couple of years ago, my friend Arnie Gamage, who passed away, had been shrimp trapping for years. He started that business, and he wasn't allowed to sell the shrimp, but he took all his shrimp around and he gave it to people in town and out of town. And you know, he told this story to me, and he later passed away a couple of years ago. And every time he gave a person shrimp, he had the biggest smile come over the recipient, whoever he gave the shrimp to, because they'd been so many years where they were just happy to get them shrimp. And we asked the question at his funeral, which was quite big, how many people he'd gone around and given these shrimp to. And probably 100 people stood up. He'd give 2 pounds. And so the public was being served by that. And so, I mean, I could support this. I'd like to see it be 5 traps. I really don't. But I don't see the problem of having it, you know, why they can't be sold. I just, you know, if people in the public know there's a shrimp season, they'll be coming to the co-ops or places like that looking to buy a couple pounds of shrimp. So that's just my comment, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you, Chuck. Could I ask you a question, Chuck?
Yes, sir.
If this passes, will you fish 3 traps?
I'm not sure whether I would. You know, I might, because I'd like to have a shrimp, and my mother would like to, and, you know, the co-op would like to have shrimp, but I come from a trawling background for years and years, so I understand, you know, what Vinnie Balzano was talking about also, but yeah, I probably would set 3 traps.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Tony, next hand.
I don't have any more members of the public, but Dennis has his hand up.
Dennis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chair. I think we're getting ourselves under getting wrapped around the proverbial axle here. So I don't know if I should consider making a substitute motion to impose a commercial fishery moratorium for 2022, and then a further motion to convene a work group of the section members and give us time to give this whole thing further thought about how we might have a, you know, small season. And to Vinnie Balzano's comments, I do understand, you know, the fact that it's an 87-13, but there's no way, I don't think the section could even consider entertaining having a, you know, an open trawl season, because we would so quickly go over the numbers in all likelihood that I don't think would be any support for that under the conditions of the stock. So I just want to make that clear in my thinking. I won't make a motion yet, but I'm very close to wanting to make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Are there any more hands, Tony?
I just want to check with Chuck. I know he just spoke, but then his hand went back up again. So Chuck Plummer's hand is up.
No, I put my hand down, so.
Okay. No worries. Thanks, Chuck. I just wanted to make sure.
You know, one thing I want to say, though, is, to be brutally honest, there's not many shrimp, you know, and if all the stock assessment says there's not many, the fishermen are sort of in agreement about that too. So a hard tack, you know, wouldn't be out of line here. Thanks.
Thank you, Chuck. Tony, if there's no more hands, then excuse me, I'd like to comment. I started being in favor of this, and as I listened through this meeting, I'm now opposed. And what I would support is the last bullet, but I'd like to see that expanded. And I think the work group would not just look at how we would relinquish management, although I think that there are a number of questions that would have to be answered on that. So I'd like to see those answers, but also how we go forward. You know, what kind of minimum data would we need going forward? Would we need the trawl survey that's going to be eliminated? If we would need that, what kind of money are we talking there? Where that money might come from? Is it possible to design some information that the fishermen could provide? So I would like to see more detail about both getting out of the fishery and then what would be entailed in staying in it, but staying in it with going forward with the proper data so we could monitor what is happening, and then also figure out what we do after this coming year. If we do a moratorium this year, then you know, what do we figure out for the following year? So that's where I have evolved, listening to everything at this time, and that's how I will be voting. So any further hands?
We have Mike Armstrong followed by Dennis Abbott.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. Just one quick note on this motion. I think whatever, we can maybe perfect it later. I'm not sure how you want to do it. Maybe just vote on this and move ahead. But I think the moratorium, we need to specify that it's probably should be another 3 years, because you know, there's nothing locked and loaded recruitment wise, and so there won't be a fishery even if we have the biggest year class we've ever seen for 3 years. So I'd like to see that. I'm not sure I'm asking to perfect this now, but any subsequent motions should contain some sort of time period for the moratorium. I think it's, as I've said before, it's helpful for industry to know what's going to happen in the future rather than year to year. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Dennis, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Richard, Mr. Chairman. Moving along here, are we going to be voting, or is this a consensus type thing where we have to reach consensus? I think we need to take some action now, because we're just, you know, continuing to talk and not get very far here.
Tony?
The shrimp section votes.
Votes, okay. So if there's no more hands, I'm assuming that there is a need for some time to caucus. So let's take 3 minutes to caucus, and then we'll come back and vote on this. Okay, time's up. Any state need additional time? Raise your hand. Any hands, Tony?
I don't have any hands from the state. I do have one member of the public that has a hand up.
Yeah, I think we're beyond public at this point. Will you do a roll call, Tony?
I can. I'll be calling the states. As if you just ask for yes, no, null, abstain, I'll say the states' names out loud.
Thank you. That would be good.
Yep. Cherie, I'm just letting you know that your mic is open.
Got it.
Richie, are you looking for me to say
Yes, would
in
you?
favor? I think
Yeah.
if you ask for those in favor, I'll just read the names out loud.
Okay. All right. All states in favor of this motion, raise your hand.
I currently have Maine with their hand up. Cherie, did your hand go up and then down? I couldn't tell.
No, it should be down.
Okay, just checking. So in favor, I have Maine.
Okay. Clear the board, and all states opposed.
For opposed, I have New Hampshire and Massachusetts.
Okay, we don't need any further because that's all the states, so there's no null, no no votes. So 2-1, motion fails. Is there any new motion?
I have
Great.
Dennis and then Cherie.
Pardon? What was the first?
I have Dennis with his hand up.
Okay, Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to continue the commercial moratorium either indefinitely or for 3 years. Let's make it for 3 years. I would also like to include the fourth bullet from the previous motion. Rather than me read it, if you could just transcribe that, or transfer that, whatever. And also, I would add the third sentence that the section would explore a personal use fishery at the same time. And I'll speak to that if I get a second.
Okay, any second to that motion?
I have Ray Kane with his hand up.
Okay, seconded by Ray. For clarification, Dennis, the second part of your motion, the work group, would it have the ability to look further than just relinquishing management? Would it have the ability to look at how we would continue management and what that might take or change from our present scheme?
I think that probably we could perfect that motion by eliminating the word relinquishing, just to discuss what management of northern shrimp looks like. I think that the group it should be open to them to go in whatever direction they feel necessary and to come back to the section with the results of whatever they would decide.
Would you entertain to include relinquishing so that is looked at?
Yeah, it should be very open. You can do it, you can wordsmith it however you like. I think that the work group should not be limited in looking at any aspect of shrimp management. I think that's the task that we would be giving this group, very simply. I don't think we should make it too complicated in a motion.
Yep, no, I think that's fine. So your intent then would be that section members then could propose questions to the group that they would like to see answers to for the full section to consider.
Go wherever they choose to try to find some not resolution, but some solution to the conundrum that we face.
Okay, but the section would have input as to directions that the section would like to see them go.
I think basically the section's going to end up being the work group. There's only 3 states, so.
Okay, all right, thank you. Ray, do you want to make comments?
I agree with this motion. I'm still a little betwixt about the section would explore a personal use fishery at the same time. Yeah, okay, that's fine, as long as some thought goes into that personal use fishery, because I think a lot of questions were asked today, and I think the department, the DNR up in Maine, has got to address those questions as far as the personal use fishery is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the section?
We have Bob has his hand up, and then Megan Ware.
Okay, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I guess a question for Dennis and Ray as maker and seconder. How is this, or I guess what's the difference between this group that will be convened next year and the group that Cherie just chaired that we heard about at the beginning of this section meeting? In other words, is this new work group really only focusing on relinquishing and on personal use, or yeah, I guess I'm just trying to see if there's a different charge to this group, or is this really a continuation of the work group that Cherie chaired leading up to this meeting?
Dennis?
Yes. To the first part, there's been conversations that we've had in the past about moving forward, whether we should continue managing shrimp or not. So that's a question that I think needs to be pushed forward. Where do we want to go with that? And as far as what the work group did in the past year or two, I think that a lot of the information or Megan's motion raised more questions about what we should be looking at. You know, there were a lot of questions posed about the implementation of a personal use fishery. So I think that using that as background, that maybe we can come to some solution or understanding. Okay.
Bob, if I could add what I was trying to have Dennis put on the record with intent is, you know, I have a lot of questions that I'd like to see the work group attack. I mean, withdrawing from this fishery, there would be parts of that. So one would be the commission. What's the process within the commission? Probably a vote by the policy board, I guess. Because I don't believe we've ever done it. And then what happens? So then will National Marine Fisheries Service assume jurisdiction? Does it assume jurisdiction in federal waters? And then what happens in state waters? So does each state then have the ability to prosecute whatever that state wants to do? And then if we're going to continue management, what is a minimum amount of data and how would it be collected? And then how much money would be involved in that? So that's what I would like to see for this group to come back to us with, so we can weigh our options of continuing management and what does that look like and how do we do it, or to say we don't think this is ever going to recover. It's going to stay in moratorium forever, and therefore we're better off spending what resources we're spending on this to another stock. So those are the kind of questions I'd be looking for. So is that helpful at all, Bob?
Hi, Richie. Yeah, absolutely. I think your comments and Dennis's comments have been very helpful. And just so everyone knows, I'm not opposed to a work group. I think it's a good idea. There's a lot to talk about here. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, this work group had a clear direction, not just get together and chat about shrimp, but it, you know, is more focused on what you just said and what Dennis said. I think that's valuable. And while I'm speaking, I think there may be value in you know, this work group reporting back out to the policy board as well as just the shrimp section. You know, there's a lot of, you know, as you said, precedent setting decisions and opinions and perspectives here on northern shrimp that the commission never really tackled before. So I think there's value in whatever comes out of this work group going out to the broader audience of the policy board and have a bigger discussion here, because you know, we may unfortunately run into this situation again where there's some fisheries that, you know, we're trying really hard on and we're not getting anywhere, and what do we do about it? So I again, not opposed to the work group, just want to make sure they had a clear charge on what to do.
Right, and I would hope that that other members of the section then would also add questions that they have, you know, for both continuing and or walking away from the, you know, as well as input from National Marine Fisheries Service. So I don't see this limited, but I understand that the working group will need direction, and I think that's important. So, who's the next hand, Tony?
It was Megan Ware.
Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess two reactions. I really like Bob's suggestion about, I do think we need to somehow incorporate the policy board into this discussion, because I think this has broader impacts than just northern shrimp. So I don't know if the motion makers would consider that as a friendly to either include a subset of the policy board or report out to the policy board some language that includes the policy board.
Yes, Dennis, do you have any objection to that as part of this motion? Or that could probably be in the minutes as intent?
Yeah, I don't have any objections. I don't know if it's necessary to put that in there at this time, but I'd be fine with any verbiage that people think is helpful to reaching some conclusions. I have no problem with.
Yeah, I would think that that Dennis has shown the intent of this motion, so I think it would be clear that it could go to the policy board. I would view the process of this coming to the shrimp section first, because the shrimp section may look at the information that's provided us, and then I would think they would decide whether, if they're going to go forward with recommending to the policy board the withdrawal, or recommendations as to how we improve the data, and how do we, and here's how much money we're going to need, and then how do we do that. So I would kind of view that as the process. So does that help you, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as it's clear in the record that the work group could have policy board members, or there's, you know, some relationship to the policy board, I think that would be helpful. And it sounds like it is clear in the record on that, so I appreciate that. I guess to move to another point, I'm really struggling with the 3 years of a continued moratorium for a couple of reasons. It feels like we're convening a work group to tackle some pretty big issues, and if we come to a resolution in that, we've kind of hamstringed ourselves to 3 years before we could potentially make a change. Same with a personal use fishery. If more of those questions are answered, it feels like we're saying, oh, but we're not going to make that change for 3 years. My other concern is, and this is what we saw at the last 3 years, and this is not meant as a criticism of anyone, but just human nature, is when we set these long timelines, we tend to, hold off making progress on things until the very end. And I think that's frankly the pattern we saw with this 3-year moratorium. Certainly the pace of the work group increased this year when we knew we were in that last year. So I'm going to move to amend to say continue the moratorium for 1 year, and I'll see if I get a second.
Okay, move to amend. Is there a second to the motion to amend?
I see no hands.
Then I have a question then, Tony. If this passes and we're in a 3-year moratorium, when the work group has completed their work, at that point, can the section vote to come out of moratorium with the information and to use the information that they've gotten from the work group?
The section can revisit the motion at any time. So
okay, so this doesn't stop us from doing anything for a 3-year period. We can relinquish this at any time.
That's correct. It does not lock you in.
Yep, thank you. So again, no hands raised for a second to Megan's motion to amend.
Correct.
Okay, so that motion fails due to lack of a second. Any hands for discussion on the main motion?
I don't have any members of this section. I do have 2 members of the public.
Okay, let's go to the public.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Dennis has his hand up.
Okay,
Got it
Dennis.
up right at the end.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I had it up, but it was down. I get confused between the red and the green. But just to Megan's proposed motion, the board can always take further action. Whatever action we take today in any legislative process is open to be changed at a next meeting. Nothing binds us to the future.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. And now to the public. Tony?
Thank you. We have Ben Martens followed by Chuck Plummer.
Okay, Ben?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that there's just 2 pieces that I'd like to push into this process to talk a little bit more about. Is like we're transitioning from a pretty data-rich fishery when it came to our management to potentially a data-poor fisheries management situation with the loss of survey work, catch data, et cetera. And so I think that would be an important part of this working group's discussion, is what's actually happening to the science and the data that we are making these decisions around, and whether that impacts the decision to explore personal use or explore relinquishing the management. I think that the underlying data questions and issues is really, really important and must be a bigger part of this management discussion. And then my second point is I think we need fishermen involved in this conversation in some way, shape, or form. And while I appreciate the section members and ASMFC and NOAA kind of convening and working through this, having a bit more of a feedback loop with either the advisors or a subset of the advisors that can try and make sure that some of those questions, concerns, ideas are heard along the way could be really, really important and helpful along the way. And if that means we need to reinvigorate the advisory panel a bit, it was disappointing to see only 4 people were able to attend yesterday. But I think this is a big enough deal for a lot of us that it's an important way to get fishermen involved in this important conversation moving forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I think those are important points, and I support your suggestion. Chuck, so you have another comment?
Well, I think my hand goes up and down. I don't touch it, so I didn't have a comment. But if it, I do, I mean, if this proposal here would explore a personal use fishery at this time, I don't understand why we couldn't have, as a fisherman, why we couldn't have had personal use this year. And to talk about having a 3-year moratorium, that would be like a 10-year closure on the shrimp industry. And I guess it would be easier for the people doing the regulating to have 3 years of not doing it, but we're kind of flabbergasted sitting here where, you know, where 3 traps would make a big difference. That's I just don't understand why. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Any other hands, Tony?
Yes, we have Gary Libby and then followed by Allie Murphy.
Okay, Gary.
Hey, just wanted to say that I'm not in favor of the 3 years moratorium. I thought we could probably, if we were going to do another moratorium, do it for 1 year and try to implement some of the stuff that we talked about in the AP, have industry involved, which kind of is the same idea that Ben had. We got to have fishermen involved with this. You're not going to have fishermen trust in this. They're going to just say they shut it down for 3 more years. They don't care about us. You know, I hear that conversation all the time. So I just think we should come back to the table every year and see where we are and try to do something to keep these surveys moving, because this is an important fishery to a lot of fishermen, especially in the state of Maine. So I just think it should be amended to 1 year for now and then change it. See what we can do later about personal use or possible small commercial use. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Gary. My intent as chair, if this work group can complete their work by next year, my intent would be to that we meet and at that time decide whether we would continue on the moratorium or implement any recommendations that the working group might come up with. So I don't see us doing nothing for 3 years. So I agree with you on that. Who is the next hand, Tony?
You had Allie Murphy, and then followed by Allie, you have Dennis Abbott.
Okay, Allie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment that I'm supportive of the motion and proceeding with this working group, and also committed to participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie. Dennis, final word.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, just to be clear, whether we declare the moratorium for 1 year or 3 years, as I said before, it doesn't preclude us from changing in the future. And what would cause us to stop the moratorium? We would surely need more shrimp in the water, and that's not likely to happen. But I think that every year when we meet as a section, as we have through all the years, we're going to hear the assessment and we're going to make a decision. We have the ability next year to end the moratorium if conditions were favorable. Surely not likely to happen. So I don't think we should get hung up about whether it's 3 years, and as I originally thought as a suggestion would be indefinitely, because we're going to be looking at it constantly. Thanks.
Okay, time to vote.
Richie, just real quick, Megan just put her hand up.
Okay, Megan, quickly.
Just a clarification, and then while I have the mic, request time for a caucus, please. So I feel Ben and Vincent have brought up good points about, what happens in the absence of the summer survey. And I'm trying to understand if this motion encompasses that discussion or not. And if it doesn't, I think it should, something to the effect of, and maybe this is a TC tasking, but what do we do in the absence of the summer survey? So I guess that's a point of clarification if that's included in this motion.
Yeah, yes, it most definitely is. And I think it's on the record that I asked Dennis and he agreed that the section members can put in questions to the work group that they would like to see answered. And I added that the work group needs to look at how we would manage shrimp going forward if we decide to do that, and what data is needed, and how do we get that data, and where does the money come from. So those are all questions that already are on the record that will go to the working group. Does that help?
That does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. 2-minute caucus. Is that all right? Any objections? 2
I
minutes.
see no hands and objection.
Okay, time's up. Tony, are you ready?
I am, Richie.
Are all the hands down?
Yep.
Okay, all those in favor of this motion, please raise your hand.
I have Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
Okay. Hands down.
Yep.
All those opposed, please raise your hand.
Maine.
Okay, motion passes 2-1. At this point, I'm going to have to leave this meeting. I have a 1 o'clock that I have to drive to that I cannot miss. So I'm going to ask Bob or Tony if you would take over, Chair.
I'm happy to do it, Richie. Tony's got her hands full with
Okay, yep.
hands raised and everything else.
Wood, I appreciate it, and I apologize for having to leave, but I don't have a choice. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Richie, for your time. Tony, any other hands right now? And I guess one question that popped into my head during that 2-minute pause was, continue the commercial moratorium for 3 years. Does this also preclude recreational fishing? If a state wanted to open up a recreational fishery, which is kind of what we talked about earlier, is that not allowed based on this motion?
Don't see any section members with their hand up yet, Bob. We have Mike Armstrong.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see anything in this motion that we couldn't put in a personal use sometime in that 3 years.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Are there any other comments, Tony, on what it means?
Marie has her hand up.
Yes, Sherry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob. There's nothing here to indicate that there's no recreational moratorium for any of the time period. So I ask the states around us, are you guys intending on opening up a recreational fishery based on this motion?
So far, I don't have any hands. And Bob, I'm going to the FMP. I don't remember off the top of my head if it speaks to recreational fisheries in the FMP or not. To my recollection, I don't think it does, but I'm double checking. And Ray Kane has his hand up.
Thanks, Tony, for looking at the FMP. And Ray, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so in the last sentence, the section would explore a personal use fishery at the same time. The time being moved to continue the commercial moratorium for 3 years, and then in 2022 convene a work group of section members. So I think it's one and the same. The section would explore personal use fishery at the time. This motion was voted up, moved to continue the commercial moratorium for 3 years. I'm not in disfavor of a recreational fishery, but I think in the motion itself, I'm reading it that it will be looked at while the commercial moratorium is in place. And as Dennis mentioned earlier, if we want to reconvene and do something different for a personal fishery or a recreational fishery next year, we can. But the way I read this motion, it's one and the same.
Thanks, Ray. Any other hands, Tony?
Sorry, I was reading the FMP. I can tell you what the FMP says, and then we have hands from Mike Armstrong and Dennis Abbott.
Great. Yeah, if you could go through the FMP, that'd be great.
Yep. So the FMP states that, hold on, lost my spot. that no management measures are included for the recreational fishery. At this time, the fishery is very limited and is usually carried out with recreational lobster traps and is for personal use. It does note that, obviously, it notes that one exists, but it doesn't have any specific management measures to it or speak to any other part of the fishery that I see here.
All right, thanks, Tony. Then we had Mike Armstrong and Dennis Abbott. Was that right?
That is correct.
Mike, go ahead, please.
Thanks. So, I mean, any personal use, given the nature of the distribution, is got to be a commercial fisherman, I would think. And at least in our state, and I think the feds and probably all the other states, if you possess a commercial fishing permit, sometimes with an endorsement for the species or not, you can't bring home recreational catch. So I think we'd have to specifically come out with a management action to allow anyone with a shrimp permit to possess a personal use amount.
Thanks, Mike. Dennis?
Yes, thank you, Bob. I think that we just caught ourselves in a wordsmithing problem here. When I made this motion using the previous motion as a guideline, when Megan made her initial motion, she had a commercial aspect of having the commercial moratorium, but also having a personal use fishery. So I think that in the past, going back to Mike Armstrong's time as being chair, when we imposed a moratorium, we didn't specify, I don't believe, commercial or recreational or whatever. We just imposed a moratorium on the northern shrimp fishery. And if it helps, I could make a quick motion that there will be a recreational moratorium for 3 years also. But I don't, if anyone feels that's necessary. But I think we just got caught up in wordsmithing here, and it's good pickup by whoever made the distinction. In the legislative process, this would be a problem.
Okay. No, thanks, Dennis. I think, most, or it sounds like, Ray and Mike and others' comments are that the intent here is not to allow for personal use or recreational fisheries to be opened at this time either. The motion clearly says commercial, but then the last section says personal use fisheries are going to be explored by the working group. And then sort of the logical follow-up to that is that, until we get a report from the working group, personal use or recreational fisheries cannot be opened or initiated in the states. So if everyone's comfortable with that interpretation, I think we're covered. No fishing for shrimp is going to happen in the next 3 years unless additional action is taken by the section. Is there any objection or any concern with that interpretation?
Yes, I would just ask Megan to comment. Barring any further clarification, could Maine folks think they could go recreationally shrimp fishing at this time?
Bob, if it's helpful, the last time this section did a moratorium, Dustin found the previous motion and it was a harvest moratorium, not a commercial moratorium. I don't know if that helps you all.
All right, thanks, Tony. Megan, do you want to respond to Dennis's question about what's allowed in Maine or what Maine's intentions might be given the wording of this motion?
Yeah, sorry for being quiet. I was just trying to scroll through our regs and laws quickly to kind of figure out what's going on because I had not picked up on that. I think it would be wise to, if people are also taking this to mean that there's no recreational personal use fishery, that motion be made, because in our law we do have an exemption for personal use, and so I don't think this motion would cover that. So I think if people want to cover that motion should be made.
I'd make a motion.
Yes, Dennis, go ahead, please.
Move to continue, no, not continue, move to have a moratorium on recreational fishery for 3 years. Excuse me. 1 year, because we're going to be thinking about it. Let's leave it at 1 year for now.
Thanks, Dennis. Can we call that recreational / personal use fishery? Because they kind of mean the same, but a little bit different sometimes.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second to Dennis's motion?
Ray, is your hand up in seconding?
No, I'm sorry, Tony. No, it isn't. It's red, so it should be green. I'm sorry.
No worries.
It's tricky. Anyone else interested in seconding the motion by Mr. Abbott?
Mike Armstrong, I think you have your hand up.
I do. I second for discussion purposes.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Is there any discussion? Or Dennis, do you want to say anything else about the motion? You've commented on it a little bit leading up to it.
No, I don't think so.
Thanks, Dennis. Mike, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I actually don't particularly like the wording of the motion. I would rather have amended the other motion just to change commercial to a harvest moratorium. I think it's just cleaner if we go with 3 years for everything, because we can always come back and open the moratorium if we decide we want a personal use fishery. Just as a point of clarification, can we open up an amendment and amend it? I'm sorry, a motion and amend it?
We can't amend the motion that has already been passed, and
That's right.
yeah, the motion the previous motion that Mr. Abbott made and the section voted on has already been passed.
He can make a friendly motion to what I made if he did. I think that might, in this small group, be acceptable. But like you said, you can't amend the past motion.
And Mike, I guess as from the chair spot, is your concern with the 1 year versus 3 year, or is it?
Yeah, no, I think as always, I don't want to give false hope. I would rather have it consistent with the commercial, and we can come back and liberalize if we feel like it. So I would ask if the motioner would be amenable to a friendly amendment to change 1 to 3.
I am, Dr. Armstrong, very amenable to your suggestion.
Excellent, thank you. Maya, if you make that change and also record Dr. Armstrong as the seconder of the motion, please, and we'll be all set. Any other comments from section members on the new motion?
No other hands from section maker or from section members. And Mike Armstrong, just to let you know, your mic is open.
Thanks, Tony. Any members of the public commenting on this motion?
No. I'm going to double check. I think he actually thinks his hand is down, but I'm just going to confirm with him. Chuck, your hand is raised right now. I know the colors are a little confusing, so your hand is actually up right now. So I'm going to unmute you just to confirm.
Well, it says red, so I'm.
Yeah, it's opposite of what you think it is.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I know. It's tricky.
Anyway, no, I'm not.
Down now. Your hand is down now.
I'm not making any comment.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck.
All right, great. Thanks, Tony. And it is completely counterintuitive of the red and green on the raise hand, lower hand thing. So excellent. So I think we're ready to vote. Is there a need for a caucus on this, or folks ready to go?
Can we get 30 seconds? Sorry, it's
Yeah, no, that's great. We'll give you a minute.
Thank you.
You guys all set, Megan?
Yeah, go for it.
You sure?
Yeah, it's just the wonders of technology. But yeah, I have information I need, I think.
All right, great. You didn't sound real confident.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead, Tony. So if you could go ahead. I guess I'll go ahead and do it. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
I have Massachusetts. That's it. Oh, no, sorry. New Hampshire has raised their hand.
All right, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. Thank you. Hands down and like sign for those opposed to the motion.
I have no hands raised for opposition.
All right. Do we have any null votes? N-U-L-L.
Maine is a null vote.
All right, excellent. Well, that's all three of the votes. So the motion carries 2 votes in favor and 1 null vote. All right. So Tony and Dustin, are there other actions that we need to take today? I don't have the agenda open in front of me right now.
Yes, there's the last agenda item is to nominate and hopefully elect a vice chair.
Thank you, Dustin.
And I believe
Is there
a nomination?
Is there a nomination for the position of vice chair of the Northern Shrimp section?
Megan Ware.
Megan, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would move to nominate Senator Miramont from Maine for the position of vice chair.
Excellent, thank you. Is there a second to nominate Senator Miramont as the vice chair of the section?
Cherie Patterson.
Thank you, Cherie. And is there any objection to electing Senator Miramont as the vice chair of the section?
Just a perfection of the motion. Let's change that to vice chair.
It's great.
Any titles are fine. We're a flexible bunch.
I see no hands in objection.
All right, then I think we are all set. And congratulations, Senator Miramont. You are the vice chair of the section now. All right, same question, Tony and Dustin. Anything else we need to tackle today before we adjourn the Northern Shrimp section?
I
believe we are all.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say I don't see any hands up for anybody wanting to speak, but I'll let Dustin speak to any other things.
I'll trust that someone will raise their hand if they think otherwise, but as far as what I was aware of, I think we're all set to adjourn.
All right, great, thanks. So yeah, nothing procedural. Anything by the section members under other business that you would like to bring up right now? I know we're running a bit long.
I see no hands.
All right, no hands. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Dennis and Ray are ready to go. Thank you both for motion and second to adjourn. And this Northern Shrimp section stands adjourned. And happy holidays, everyone, if I don't talk to you before the upcoming holidays. Thank you for your hard work today, everybody.